Hello, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. This is my first live hangout. I'm not quite sure if it's working or not. Let me go check the chat room. If anybody is there, we're going to start in just a few minutes here. If this is working, let's go over here. Let's see. Thank you for your patience. Let's see. We are live. Okay. All right.
Yep, I see you.
Cool. Okay. It's 6:57. We got a few minutes, so we'll just wait for a few people to file in. If we're going to have any live viewers, I hope we do have some tonight. I am going to go onto my second computer here. Excuse me one moment and just make sure things are working. Let me see. Live viewers, I hope we do have some tonight. I am going to go onto my second.
Okay, cool. There's about like a 10-second delay.
Okay, cool. All right, and we will start in just one moment here.
Oh, yeah, I'm on the screen too. Okay.
Awesome, awesome. All right. All right. What's that?
I said I level with toys and stuff in the background.
I know, bang, 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 bang. Okay, I think, well, 2 minutes. Let's give it the real time limit here. How is your day, Chris?
Oh man, it's been a crazy one. We've just been doing just normal Saturday stuff, running around, getting stuff ready for the holidays. We basically were taking family photos. We got my wife's parents coming in, so we're taking a big family photo, and so we're trying to get my little one a outfit that matches. And yeah, kids clothes is like a whole nother realm I did not imagine it was going to be.
Well, you're pretty involved, because I remember I saw a video of yours and there was like this, it looked like sweetgrass or lemongrass in the background. It was like a baby drawing rack. I'm like, oh wow, yeah. I feel dumb.
No, I mean, and unless you have kids, like, why would you know what that is? Like,
exactly. That's cool. Yeah, I forget like Thanksgiving's next week. I'm like, oh my God, the holidays are here. This is crazy.
Yeah. It pretty much starts where it's like that. It's like, the thing is, like, once November starts, you've got this just like, okay, I've got, birthdays and holidays and just Christmas, and then you got all this stuff, and it's a busy time of the year.
Yeah, it is, for like a month and a half. Man. All right, so we're gonna de-stress now. No more thinking about the holidays. We're gonna start this live stream. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, thanks for tuning in tonight. I am RealToughCandy, and I am joined tonight by Chris Marlowe. He is a web developer out of the Chicago area. And I reached out to him because, as a beginning developer and as an aspiring developer, there are just so many freaking resources. Like, you don't know where to start. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But there's such a disconnect being a self-taught developer that compared to the workspace. So tonight, Chris is going to talk about some awesome stuff. I'm going to go through the list he sent me about things he's going to talk about. Finding your direction as a learner. The realities of being a self-taught developer, practical knowledge versus all knowledge, work reality versus imagined expectations, tools like gulp, version control, freedom versus micromanagement, working as a team and then working by yourself. This is the other thing too, is that when you're learning and just starting, you're kind of in like this tutorial heaven where you're not really challenged like you are in the workspace. So he's going to be talking about that too, crazy algorithms, and how he handles mistakes. So that's a lot to talk about, and I'm going to hand it over to Chris right now. I hope everyone can hear me. Again, this is my first live stream, so hopefully we will avoid any technical difficulties. But I'm going to throw it over to Chris, and Chris can take it away.
Cool. Thanks, RealToughCandy. So just to do a quick mic check, can everybody hear me? Can I get a thumbs up or a like or something so I know? There's a 10-second delay, so
okay.
I'll start talking, and hopefully there's a text reaction. Cool. Anyways, so in regards to this, let's go ahead and begin. So who am I? First of all, my name is Chris Marlowe. I'm also on CodeChris on YouTube, and we hear you. That's good. And so anyways, So I'm a self-taught web developer, and my background is actually not web development. I didn't go to school for this or anything like that. Everything I've learned is 100% either through books or through online resources, and I'll kind of run through that a little bit. And I started my YouTube channel, and I figured I'd do this talk because, especially in the beginning or just in general, there's a lot of questions about not only like, getting into the industry, but more so like what's actually important, what's not important, all that stuff. So let's go ahead and get started, because I'm sure there's a lot of questions out there. If you do have any questions, please feel free, just go ahead and just type it in there. And RealToughCandy, if you can just let me know, because I won't be watching it as much as you will.
For sure.
And then just we'll go ahead and just pop them in as they come.
Awesome.
So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So let's talk about the very first thing. So when you start this process of whether you're going to go to a boot camp, or you're going to teach yourself, or you're going to college, whatever the case is, self-taught, the reality is that when you start looking at code and you're like, hey, I'm going to take this serious, what am I going to do? The first thing that I'm going to recommend is find your direction. Whether it's C# or JavaScript or whatever the case is, figure out exactly what it is you want to do as a destination, because that's really going to dictate everything you learn. In the beginning for me, like when I was trying to learn, like I learned a little bit of Python. I was like, okay, maybe I should learn C. And then I had a buddy who was like really involved in like C#. And I was messing with all these things without fully grasping anything. And then that didn't give me a clear direction. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is just suggest you find out what you want to do. So if you want to do, for example, mobile app development, you're like, hey, man, I want to design for Android and iOS, then make that your focus. And then you already know what you want to do, and you can find the information you need. You need Swift, you need Java, you need Android, all that stuff. If it's full stack, if it's front end, if it's back end, even if it's AI or virtual reality, Internet of all things, those are all kind of specific paths and fields that will really sort of like, eliminate a lot of all the extra noise. There's a ton of noise, especially when you get into this, because you don't know what direction you're trying to get into. So kind of figure out where you want to end up. And then once you do know that, eventually what's going to end up happening is you're going to have the first real question of like, all right, well, I want to get into mobile development, or I want to get into web development. And when you start applying for jobs, the reality is one of the first questions you're going to be asked during all the interviews, during the entire process, is how much are you looking to make? And salary is never a comfortable idea for a lot of people. Get comfortable with it. It's just a number, and regardless of the field that you're in, just get comfortable with the number. And more importantly, find out what your actual worth is. This is something that I really suggest, especially for when you're coming in. You don't want to undercharge yourself and basically say like, oh, like I'll do it for free. Find out what the competition is in your area. And the reason why I say like, oh, don't ask for this much money is because depending on where you live and the jobs that are available to you in your area is really going to dictate how much you request, right? So if you live in San Diego, New York, Chicago, or if you live in the suburbs, or if you live in like Nebraska, those are all very different costs of living. And what I would suggest doing is going to things like Glassdoor, go to Indeed, look at all of the applications, and you'll start to see things like entry-level developer, regular web developer, junior level developer, whatever it is that you're looking for, and you'll get a sense for how much they're willing to pay. And this is going to help you in your negotiation stage. And once again, I know not everybody's comfortable with negotiations, but it's an important step. Even if you are just trying to get your foot in the door, there is like a minimum threshold you want to make sure that you meet. And that's just for your benefit, because you're doing this for a reason. It's I'm sure you're trying to better yourself, better your providing for your family, or you just want a really nice car. I don't know what the reason is, but so sort of know your worth and don't be shy about talking about it. The next thing is I don't know what my note here is about lower temperature. Oh yeah, if you are asking for something lower, just make sure that it's a temporary thing, because in the beginning, the most important thing is obviously getting your foot in the door. Once you're in the door, because let me tell you, the first job, and my experience might be different from others, but for me, being self-taught, I didn't have anything, and I'll show you how, but I didn't have anything on paper to show like experience. I mean, I found ways of showing code experience, but at the end of the day, like I hadn't worked for a company doing web development yet. So basically what, you know, you get to be willing to sort of, you can make some adjustments for something that you know is going to be more temporary, because once you get your foot in the door, now you have a year of experience. Now you have 2 years experience, 3 years experience, whatever the case is. And it's much easier for you to move around. And shortly before this interview, actually, I actually started my second job in web development. So I got my foot in the door at one company, got my experience under my belt, and my second job has been much easier to get. So much so that I have a little bit more of a flexibility of like, okay, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I'm looking for. And I think that's just kind of something to note, and it's important. Okay, so let's talk about the realities once you get the job. All right, the realities of being self-taught and going into the workforce. What's something you should expect? Well, if you are self-taught, there are some things right off the bat you should expect. First of all, because you don't have any like actual working experience as far as they're concerned, they're gonna test you. And I don't know if it's any more or as much as any other developer, but you definitely are going to be tested, because they need to evaluate your skill set and verify, okay, does this guy know how to, you know, make tables? Does he know how to do this basic algorithm? Does he know how to, you know, make a request? Does he know how to do some of these things? Because at the end of the day, that's what the job entails. There is going to be this sort of idea that you have to like know everything perfectly during your interviews, that you have to be like, you know, I don't want to say Mark Zuckerberg, but we'll just go with that because that's a well-known name. But you don't have to be like that guy to go ahead and get the job. All right, actually, I've got the live stream. It's kind of distracting, so I'm going to lower that. I see myself talking in a delay.
Nice.
Anyways, but what I wanted to, yeah, so during the interview, what's going to happen is you get these questions, right? And like I said, there are going to be some simple questions. And regardless of whether or not you get the job, because don't feel bad if you don't get the job. I went to many interviews that I did not get the job for, and that's totally fine. But what you will start to see is you will see the same questions kind of being repeated over and over and over. Now, for me, I was doing web development, so I started seeing a lot of similar questions about CSS and JavaScript over and over and over, right? So, for example, like one of my first interviews, I was super excited because it was AT&T and all this stuff, and I didn't get it, obviously. But the point is at the time, looking back on it now, I was like, I totally know this now. But I remember one of the questions they asked was, well, in regards to CSS, can you tell us the difference between you know, visibility hidden and display none? And my chops weren't quite right. I wasn't, you know, I was like, and they say like, you know, hey, don't worry if you don't know. Well, I did worry, and I didn't really know. And but I afterwards, I made a note of that. And afterwards, when I got home, I researched and figured it out and found out like, oh, you know, the big difference is like whether it's just gone entirely or it's hidden, but the space is still there. That's like the big thing. And so like that stuck with me. And turns out it happened at another interview. They had this exact same question. Or a common one for JavaScript is the triple equals, right? What's the difference between 2 equal signs and 3 equal signs? Can you explain the difference? And so you'll start to see a lot of similarities over and over and over. And so every interview is really just a practice session, and it gets your chops up. And really just make note of them. If you have an online test, some companies will give you an online test or an online questionnaire. What I did is I screen recorded or took a snapshot of those questions that were asked, all of them, even if I knew them, because at the end, I would be told which ones were right, which ones were wrong, and how I scored. But then I have a record, and it's, you know, how I kind of learned more about, you know, I remember like immutable objects was something that I'm like, I'm not quite sure. And then, you know, I got the answer wrong. And then basically afterwards, I looked it up and found out what's going on. So take something away from all these experiences. There's nothing wrong with, like I said, not getting the job. And every time you kind of like build your armor, you get a little better, you get a little stronger, and you really start doing much better and much more confident at each one of these things. Now, the real question is like, well, Chris, I'm self-taught, or there's other people who have been, you know, Chris, I'm self-taught, but there's other people who have been to college, right? Or there's other people who have been to boot camps. And I feel you, because I had that exact same sort of uncomfortableness. Like, I'm competing with people who have been mentored by professionals in the field. I am competing, which is true, like you are competing with people who have paid good money for their education. And they definitely have a skill set, and they, you know, definitely should know their stuff. But if you're worried that, you know, where you go to school or how you learned makes a difference, that the only way I can get this job is if I go to boot camp, or is if I go to this school, or if I go to this location, that's not true. Most companies, not all, but most companies don't care where you learned what you learned. And that's also a reason for these tests. Because at the end of the day, what you're doing is similar to the artistic world. In the artistic world, you are based solely off your portfolio. They don't care where you went to school. They don't care if Leonardo da Vinci was your teacher. At the end of the day, all they care about is how good does your work look, and that's what you're being hired off of. That's what you're being. That's what you're competing off of. And the point of these tests is to verify that you have that skill set, that you know that skill set. That's what they're paying you money for. And your portfolio, it doesn't have to be rockin'. It doesn't have to be like the best thing ever. The point is, your portfolio is going to demonstrate your skill set enough that you can get to the interview. Really, a lot of that thing, like the portfolio and building all these additional things on the side projects, they're all about getting into that face-to-face interview. Because once you're at that face-to-face interview, the reality is that you are one of the top contenders. They have seen your work, and they believe that you are a serious enough candidate to warrant the time of the HR, the lead developer of the whatever, and, you know, maybe the boss and another guy, right? Like, there's going to be multiple people whose time is being pulled away to discuss with you and talk with you and challenge you to verify if you're the best person, if you're the best candidate for the position. And so if you get the face-to-face interview, it's a good thing. And, you know, you once again, your portfolio just needs to get you that far. Because once it's gotten you that far, your foot's in the door, that's when you really prove yourself, and that's when you're really going to discuss what it is about whatever questions they throw at you and do all that. Like I said, they do have the similar questions.
Chris, I'm sorry to totally interrupt you. I said I wasn't going to, but you brought up a great point that I wanted to address before I forgot it, because I have the memory of a goldfish. But you said that if you're in the interview, they already want you. I mean, you're already one of the top candidates. So I think that's especially important for people to keep that confidence. If you're going to that interview, they just want to confirm that you're the right person for the job. I mean, you're almost in the door at that point. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, it's 100% correct. Like, the reality is that I try to think of everything from a business standpoint, whether it's salary, benefits, or whatever the case is. You're bringing a value to a company, and as long as you're providing them a higher value than what you're asking for, they want you. That's what they want. And if you are seriously being considered, it's because if you're going to the face-to-face interview, it's because you are being seriously considered. Mm-hmm. And they think you can bring value to the company, and they just need that verification, and they just need to make that final determination. Okay, we've got these candidates. We've narrowed it down to these candidates. You've already passed the initial filters. You've proven your ability to some extent, and now it's like, not just are you good, are you right for the company?
Awesome.
You know? So, but the other question too is like, all right, man, but okay, let's get into like, there's all these things to learn, right? You mentioned earlier that, hey, there's a million and one places to learn stuff. There's all this stuff that's going on, all these languages, frameworks, everything under the sun. So what do you actually need on the job? So what I call practical knowledge versus this idea of like all knowledge. And there's a couple of things I need to immediately address. On the job, the reality is a portion of your job is to do research and development. You are going to do some R&D time. You do not know, and there is no way on earth you will know everything coming in. It is impossible. There is just too much stuff. And it can be little stuff too. Like it can be like, you'd think that, oh, well, everybody knows how to, how to do, I don't know, before and after CSS. Yeah, that might be true, but maybe they're not using it all the time or whatever the case is, right? And sometimes you need to do silly stuff like, okay, what's that attribute that I can pull up? What's the property that I can, and you just Google it. It takes 10 seconds and you find the answer and you use it. You're constantly going to be using Google. You're constantly going to be using Stack Overflow. You're constantly going to be looking up bugs because your code's not working. This doesn't matter if you're in mobile development or web development or whatever. It's just, it comes with the job. A portion of this job, and the reason why it's more abstract is because it isn't straightforward. It's not straightforward when I give you a rendering from an artist in Photoshop and say, make this a website. That doesn't mean anything. Like, you need to know how to abstractly kind of put pieces together and understand how this would work functionally, how it's going to be responsive, how you're going to bring more life to it. All those things are really, really important. And a portion of your job is going to be Googling, researching around. You're not wasting time. And I think that's an important thing to note, is that your job will understand that you don't know everything. And any job, if they don't give you access to the internet, it's probably not somewhere you want to work, because they're expecting you to know something that's just not possible. But this comes into an idea I have. It's called the difference between like programming and syntax. It's very, very easy to learn a framework, to learn a language, and to get started up and running. Like, all you need is basic documentation, and you can get up and running pretty quick. Even if it's something brand new to you, you can get started. And the reality is, there's a difference between programming and just knowing how to code the syntax. The syntax is really just, what is a for loop, right? What is a div? What is an attribute? What is a property? What is a prototype, right? What are those things? That's just the coding part of stuff. The programming is, I know all these tools in my toolbox. What's the smartest, best way for me to use this, right? Because you can hammer a nail with a wrench, but it's not really the best way of doing things. And that's where you can start being creative and understanding, okay, this is how stuff goes together. This is maybe a good approach. And here's maybe a way I can future-proof this. Here's maybe a way that I can make this thinner, faster, smaller. Ooh, here's a way to make this, cleaner, right? And all that comes with just time. But it's the difference between just knowing, how to build something versus how to build it correctly. And the reality is, one of the awesome things about code is you can build anything, right? Like there is no limitation as far as what your skill set is on what you can't build. You may not know the best way of doing it, but if you know the basics, you can build something. And as you get better, that's kind of one of the important things is really knowing how to program, when to best utilize certain practices and all that stuff. Okay, so all of that out of the way, well, what's the reality, man? Like when I actually get the job, like I've got this crazy vision that I'm just like, you know, just banging away on the keyboard all day. And then I see like Google where they're just like, you know, sitting in their chairs and thinking like, what's the balance? What's going on? What's the actual reality of what I'm going to be doing? Okay, so I'm a web developer. And actually, at my previous job, I was a web developer, and I got to do, it was mostly front end, but I got to do a little bit of back. And at my new job, it's a much larger company, and they have us split into specialties. And so my specialty is front end development. So I focus purely on front end development for the most part. Not to say that's not important to know all the different parts that are all going to be talking to each other, because you do work as a team and talk with each other. But my focus, at least for this company, is in front end development. So what should I expect? Well, the reality is you're going to be doing one of two things. You're going to be either building projects, or you're working on tickets. And tickets sound really boring, but I'll explain. So building projects. Building projects are super straightforward for me. What happens is I get a Photoshop piece from the, designers, and it's been approved. The clients talk to them, all this stuff, and boom, go ahead and get started. Make this a website, right? And depending on the website, and from the two different jobs, depending on which job I was working at, the amount of information I'm given is different. So my first job was a much smaller company, and so I got to wear a lot more hats. With that, the information I was given was much less. So it might be the layout of the homepage and the basic feel for, like, you know, 1-column, 2-column layout. And all the other pages with content, I would have to sort of, like, you know, get a vibe for and figure out what would work best. And I would ask the lead developer and designer for their input, and, you know, what's kind of been approved and agreed upon. Smaller company, so it was a little bit faster to get some of that stuff. Bigger company, it's a little more straightforward. Like, hey, here's the cut for this layout. Here's the cut for this layout, and make it happen. And still some flexibility, especially once you start. Usually, you get a mobile layout and you get a desktop layout. They say make it happen. And the in between, which you hate, is the tablet size. The tablet size is just like at your discretion. Figure it out. Find that balance, because the tablets are just a terrible, weird size. But anyways, so that's if you're working on a project, you'll be getting your feedback from your project manager or the lead on the project. And it can be everything from reviewing your code to be like, hey, here's a more effective way of doing this. Or, hey, I like what you did there. Can you tell us about that? Why did you do it this way? Here's a more effective way. Whatever the case is. So there's some collaboration and peer programming that you do. And that's on the project side of things. And let me think if there's anything else specifically about projects. No, I think projects are pretty straightforward. If I say, like, I think it's pretty much what everybody imagines they're doing all day. The reality about projects, though, once again, depends on the company. There is this, when you're learning how to build a lot of stuff from scratch. Like, you're given like a blank text editor or IDE, right? And it's just empty. And you got to build everything from scratch, 100%. The reality is, when you get into a production environment, that is not very cost effective, right? You'll be doing a lot of redundant code over and over when every client has the same opening and closing brackets for numerous pieces and similar parts. So what you would end up having is sort of these pre-built, not templates, but sort of starting points, right? Boiler templates. And it can be anything from a site that you're actually duplicating over and using that sort of as a base, switching out content, manipulating the layout a little bit, and going from there. Or it could be very much like a bare bones skeleton boiler template, And from there, you're kind of building some modules that get inserted, but these are previous modules that you used before. So you've saved that code somewhere and you can pull it from a repo and whatever the case is. So it just kind of depends on what the situation is. But don't think that you're going to be building everything from scratch. That's just not the case. But you will build plenty of things brand new, particularly like modules is a common thing, which kind of segues directly into tickets. So tickets, that's basically just you working usually on a live ticket. A live website. This is a website that has already been released out into the open world. It's running amongst the internet animals, and it's free to roam around, right? Everybody has access to it. So you'll get these live tickets, and big company, small company, doesn't matter. What'll happen is you will end up getting a wide array of issues that could happen, right? And the issues could be something as simple as, hey, by the way, the text on this button should really say this. Okay, not a big deal, right? Or the issue could be, hey, by the way, the text on this button, that button shouldn't be there. In fact, can we change this whole layout so it does this, this, and that? And also, like, I need it to make a duplicate copy and be sent to this email address. And when you submit, I want this crazy landing page to appear, and then redirect them here. It's a wide range. It's a wide range as far as what it could be. It could be a quick, 5-minute job, or it could be like, a 3-day job. It just really ranges. The important part is that you're working on your change is going to be committed to a live site when you're done, and versus when you're in the project stage, when you're building a project, you are still kind of working with it before it's been released to the public. So if you mess up, nobody sees anything, not yet. So but
hey,
yes.
Chris,
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you once again. We got a topic-sensitive question here from Michael Kornblum. When you're talking about your template solutions, are these? Michael Kornblum wants to know: are these solutions off the shelf like Bootstrap, or are they developed in-house?
Good question. It depends. So let me tell you a little bit. It kind of depends. So I have two places to pull from. So the first company I worked at, like I said, smaller company, we worked on WordPress websites. As far as the templates go, when we were building a brand new project, we were doing one of a few things at the time when I was there. Either A, we had built a theme ourselves that we were continuously updating and tweaking to better future projects and future iterations, and we would do like the code and on the back end of that and make it work better, and that would sort of be like our starting template, right? Or we would have a website that we had already completed and finished, and we kind of use that as a starting template. Or we, in some rare cases, we're actually starting from scratch. In regards to using Bootstrap or like a theme that's already existing on WordPress, it kind of depends. So with Bootstrap, no website that I've worked on with either company works exclusively the entire thing 100% in Bootstrap. However, it is a tool they use in their toolbox. And a lot of these frameworks and frameworks and libraries, they're just tools. So you don't really want to do like the commit yourself to like everything and it's going to be done this way. So in some cases we have modules where the way it's being set up in the grid and just the expectations, it's just way faster and easier to set up the Bootstrap classes and be like, okay, cool, this is a 3, this is a 3, this is a 3, done, boom, it's off. It just kind of depends on a lot of things. It could also depend on the budget of the client. Depending on their budget, we can give more time and resources to them, and we can do some additional flexibility things. Or if we're on a faster timetable because of a smaller budget, absolutely. Like we're using Bootstrap hardcore. Like, okay, cool, let's get this set up. Let's get this layout set. Cool. Great. mobile's done, desktop's done, let's move on to the next page. And it just really depends on a number of things. What I would say is if you are going into front-end development, it is going to be a necessity that you know Bootstrap. And even if the company you work at doesn't use Bootstrap, they will use some sort of grid-based system that is similar to Bootstrap. And it may, by the way, not even be like the newest version of Bootstrap. So for example, one company I was working at, they had the styling set up from Bootstrap, but there were certain things that would end up getting in conflict between the theme and Bootstrap and our own internal styling that was just clashing. So what ended up happening is we kind of took pieces of the grid that we liked and worked, and we would call those, but we would omit others. Bootstrap 4, for example, right now, like you can build everything with it. Like you can change the display from it. You can display type from it. You can change not only the grid, but the type of grid you're using. So it's a flex or it's a block or whatever, but at different sizes. Like it's got a lot more stuff than before. And I don't know how far they've gone into it because at that point I was in my transition phase. At the company I work at now, because there's a lot of code going on, we want to really avoid conflicts. So in regards to Bootstrap specifically, they love the grid system. It's great. And everybody knows the classes. They understand the classes. So what they've done is they basically stripped out just the classes for the grid system and use it accordingly where they need it. And but they've omitted a lot of other features and other classes that Bootstrap has to avoid any conflicts, and also just because they don't need them or they didn't use them because of the way our CMS works, because we're not using WordPress at the other company. So it just really depends. But if you are in front of development, definitely Bootstrap's important. And the boiler templates, it's not so much that it's an off-the-shelf. We have done off-the-shelf templates, but in most cases, you're still not going to be like, okay, cool, I got the theme, switch out content, I'm done. Because for the company, there's usually an association that, well, we don't want to be that company that just takes stock themes and switches out content. There's other companies that do that. So usually you might take that theme and create a child theme and, you know, start changing things up a little bit. And then on top of that, you're changing some layouts and you're kind of using it like as a starting point. You build out. When you're done, it should resemble some of the styling from the initial theme, but definitely doesn't look like you're like the one you just, you know, bought off the shelf, because you want to avoid that aesthetic.
Awesome.
Sorry, lengthy answer.
No, it was awesome. That was a great answer. Thanks, Michael, for answering that question. Anyways, yeah.
Which actually does bring up a good thing. So in regards to the general tools you should be expecting, right? At this point, you know, RealToughCandy, you've mentioned, there's a ton of things going on. There's WordPress, there's Node.js, there's just regular front-end JavaScript. There's all these stuff, and the question is what should you expect? And you've learned a certain way, right? Like, hey man, I know LAMP, right? Like that's my stack. That's how I roll. Let me tell you, both places where I'm working, I did not know what they were using. The first company I worked at, they used predominantly WordPress, and WordPress is built on PHP. When I got the job, I did not know PHP and I did not know WordPress. I knew WordPress to the extent that it existed, and I made a blog entry for a blog I don't update nearly enough. But with that, you know, I got the job because they could see that I was, you know, willing to learn stuff. And the reality is that on the job, you're going to learn stuff. The company I work at right now, they use a CMS that I'm not familiar with at all. At the other company, actually both companies have some websites that are on their own custom CMS. So you actually can't find it anywhere. You can't practice for that. And in some cases, the documentation may not be as simple to get to, or it might be some word of mouth of like, hey, how does it do this thing? Oh, ask the lead developer. He built the thing, So it just kind of depends. But you're going to need to learn to adapt to the workflow, the software, the setup. Whether it's PHP Storm or it's Visual Code or Visual Studio, or whatever the case is, there's going to be different tools you're using. And for example, you might have learned on Atom or Sublime Text, and you're like, that's my go-to, man. Like, I'm comfortable with it. I know it inside and out, and that's great. But if everybody else at the company is using Visual Code, which at the company I work at, it's Visual Code is the popular beast. It's better for you to get used to adapting to things, adapt to the culture, because when you have those peer reviews, when you have somebody who's taking a look at your stuff, you kind of want to all be on the same page. Like, coding is complicated enough. It's legacy code or dealing with somebody else's code who you don't know. Figuring stuff out, it's already a task in itself. Don't make the simplicity of knowing how to navigate what they're working on more difficult. So that's kind of been my thing. I know some people are very passionate about whatever IDE or text editor, but or even languages. I try to distance myself from that passion. Like, oh, this is the only way to do things. This is the best way of doing things, because who really cares? At the end of the day, you're working on it as a team, and be flexible, adapt, and that's really what's going to be important. So whether it's Gulp, are you not familiar with Gulp? Okay, that's fine. If the company uses Gulp and they have tasks set up, you're going to start learning, and that's fine. That's good. That's what you want to have happen. You're not going to know everything going in the door, and it's not expected that you know everything going in the door. Once again, it's just impossible. The important thing is, are you willing to learn? If they show you things, are you going to pretend like you know everything? Like, oh yeah, Gulp. I know that's a thing. I've made many Gulp tasks before. No, it's fine. Like, it's okay. And developing the actual workflow will also change from company to company. Whether it's using Bitbucket, or it's using GitHub, or it's using SmartGit, yeah, or it's using a totally different system where you just push directly to an internal server. I mean, everybody's company workflow is different, and it's okay. Just prepare to adapt. And I would say that's probably the most important thing, is that you're willing to adapt to workflows, but not just workflows, software, and the setup. The way you have things set up, it might be different than the way you would do things at home. And that's okay. And I might get some backlash for that, but for me, I would just say that's important in the team environment. Let's see here. Different CMSs. Obviously, you're like, I know WordPress inside and out. Great. Company I work at uses Sitefinity. Not at all anything like WordPress. Not at all. So just prepare. Code standards. Different companies have different coding standards. Smaller company, your clients are smaller. You might not be thinking as much about screen readers. You may not be thinking as much about how things look on, even the iPhone 4. Maybe it's a little bit less of an importance to you. Bigger companies, you're thinking about those things. You're thinking about the fact that, hey, not everybody has access to 3G. You really need to be really selective with your requests. You really need to be selective with that page size. Yeah, it's not big for anybody who has 3G, but what if you're in the middle of nowhere? And what if, as things change, we're getting more and more mostly mobile traffic? So it does make a difference, not necessarily on size, but even the number of requests you're making. So it's little stuff like that. One of the coolest examples I can show of that is, so at my new job, during this training period, they've been trying to like tweak the way I think about the web. And they've been trying to tweak the way I think about the web. And so one of the things is basically something simple like the difference between loading an image versus loading a background image, and you take occupying the same amount of space. Because the user doesn't notice the difference, but how does the request change? If you're lazy loading it in, how does that change the speed? All those kinds of things factor in. One of the most interesting things to me that I didn't really think about was something as simple as like the search icon. Okay, search icon, right? And we have like, at my old job, we use Font Awesome all the time. So we would, okay, cool. Well, there's like an icon for that. There's an icon for this. Hamburger menu, whatever. And the reality is you're making a request to a library, and you're making a request for something. And if you're only using one piece of it, you're still requesting the whole thing. Well, if it's something like a search icon or if a hamburger menu, why don't you just do all that in straight CSS? And more so, if you do it with like just one div in CSS and use before and after and utilize them, and you can get some crazy stuff once you start thinking in that idea approach. I saw something where somebody built a Facebook icon using straight up CSS before and after, and it's crazy. And what does that do? Makes no requests, and it loads faster. And it's all these little things that you start thinking about. So yeah, that's just coding standards will differ, and that's kind of important. And you can stop me at any point if I'm rambling.
No, definitely. Chris, you are dropping some awesome gems. I'm going to hop on. Let's wrap it up in like 10 more minutes. And I'll.
Oh, boy. All right. I'll hurry fast then.
No. Chill. That's totally fine. Totally cool. But I'll hop on like a few minutes before and let you know if it's time to wrap up or you finished wrapping up or whatever. But
okay, cool.
Yeah. You're doing awesome. Thank you so much. And plus we have a lot of great questions too. So I'm super excited for that. So I'll let you do your thing and I'll pop on in about 10 more minents.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Cool. All right. So, all right, I'll try and get a little faster here. So, kind of mentioned that. Okay, cool. Real quick, something that you should expect. Once again, companies work a little different. There's different coding practices. One company uses SAS. Another company used less. Didn't know less coming in. You learn it on the job. You learn whatever their practice is and how they're utilizing the tools. For example, less has certain abilities for nesting, just like SAS does. And the company I worked at initially, they did not use less in that way. They really only used it for its variables, and they liked the CSS to be styled a specific way, so they could run through it a certain way. Best practice or not, just be aware there are some habits you might have to break depending on who's in charge and who's kind of leading the thing there. Which brings me to management. Okay, guys. Big difference I have here is between two different companies. And there's a difference between being micromanaged and not, just being totally free. So in regards to the micromanagement, I think the cons are pretty obvious, right? You feel a lot of pressure. There's just always like, man, am I doing this fast enough? Am I doing this smart? And it does weigh on you quite extensively. And that kind of micromanagement can really kind of be backward productive. There are some pros being in the sense that you have immediate access to answers. You have immediate access to the manager who's basically going to be approving everything, right? Immediate feedback, that you get constant communication back and forth, and communication is super, super, super important in the field. However, there's nothing like freedom. When you are trusted to be like, all right, man, well, here's the thing. If you got any questions, let me know. And just left to do your own bidding. For me, at least, I found you work far more effectively. You don't, besides not feeling just extra stress and pressure, I think your creativity starts triggering, right? You start thinking more because you're not under pressure. People tend to work better when they're not under pressure and just be like, oh, you know, it'd be a cool idea. I can make this thing kind of animate because, you know, it's not really doing anything and it's over here. You kind of start those creative juices flowing. You're not as stressed about the time. And the thing is that when you're given that freedom, it's because the company really trusts the employee, and they're basically like, hey man, you know, we know you know how to do the job. If you need us, you'll let us know. And so my new job, I'm given true freedom to very, very much. A lot of our communication with the rest of my team is via Skype or Slack. And really that's kind of a different change for me being at a bigger company versus a smaller company. But yeah, man, that freedom, it's gold. Depending on what your first job is, you may not have that luxury of choosing exactly how you kind of land or what you kind of land, and you may not know until you actually start the job. Regardless though, try and make the most of it. And you know, once you start proving yourself, you'll see that you'll be given more slack. If you are being more micromanaged, you will be given more slack over time, and that's just kind of something to think about. Meetings. So you're in a job. Every job's a little bit different. The meetings can range. You can have a daily morning meeting. You could have a weekly morning meeting or lunchtime meeting, depends on where you work, or a bi-weekly meeting, you know. And these meetings really aren't anything crazy. They're not to put you on the spot. They're really just because you have a project manager who's going to be in charge of managing not only you, but other projects that are being done, other tickets, other developers. And they just want to just check in with you like, hey man, what do you have going on today? What do you have going on this week? Do you need any help? What's going on? Hey, here's this new website that's coming up. What challenges do you guys see before we get started with this? What should I ask the client on your behalf? You being the developer, you aren't necessarily always going to have direct access to the client all the time. And really, you may not want to. The job of the people above you is to really do a lot of the nitty gritty, you know, all of the figuring out. You tell them like, hey man, I need to know, how does this react? How does this move? What happens when I click this button? Is this a hover thing? Like our last project we did this. Is that similar on this project? You don't want to be working on code without having a clear, full understanding of what it is on earth you're doing or building. Because the reality is that you can spend 4 or 5 hours on something and turns out you did it wrong. And when that happens, because it will happen, don't freak out about it. People are usually pretty cool about it and just like, yeah, man, I wish you had let me know. You just needed to do this, you know. You can also very easily overcomplicate things. So getting that communication back and forth, that clarity is going to be key. If you're not sure about something, ask about it. There's nothing wrong with asking questions. Nobody thinks you're dumb or stupid. And if you don't know how to do something in code, ask your peers, ask your fellow developers. If they don't know, you can ask the next step up. And if they don't know, you should be researching simultaneously all this stuff. So there's nothing wrong with not knowing and asking around and getting clarity on the topic. You'll discuss any brainstorming issues. Great, cool.
Hey, Chris, can I ask you to touch upon mistakes you make in the workforce? And then I think we'll wrap it up and ask some questions.
Cool. All right, so in regards to mistakes you're gonna make, how about mistakes I've made? So mistakes I've made. So 100%, I've definitely made the mistake of pulling down a website or pushing to a repo that was incorrect. I thought I was on one repo and I ended up pushing the wrong code to a different site or something like that. And then you just kind of like have that confusion and you're like, oh wait, no, let's back this up. Let's undo this. You're going to, like I said, to make the mistake of you're given what sounds like a simple task and maybe you don't ask a question, or maybe you misunderstand the task and you end up spending far more time on it than you're supposed to. And then you find out that you were totally wrong. That's going to happen. You're also going to make the mistake of let's see here. I mean, the most common mistake you're going to make is end up spending too much time on something because you didn't really understand it, you didn't know it, or it just most likely it just wasn't communicated clearly to you, or you misunderstood. That's majority of the mistakes you'll end up making.
Okay. But like you said, don't be afraid to ask for clarification. Like you emphasized, there's no shame in asking for help.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is for example, I know there have been, for example, other developers who have accidentally brought down a site that was live, right? And like that's like, oh my gosh, everything's on fire because a website is down. And it happens. We have redundancies set in place because of, hackers or malicious code that just comes from wherever. So stuff like that happens. Sometimes it'll be big, sometimes it'll be small. Sometimes it'll be something only happened, right? You'll come to a website a month later doing a totally different ticket and realizing that the changes you made totally break on mobile and nobody's noticed yet. And so you just notice. Don't try and hide it. Don't be like, okay, nobody's noticed that I accidentally broke it. And that was like a month ago. So it's probably fine not to say anything. I'll wait until somebody. Just go ahead and notify them and say, hey, by the way, like while I was there, I noticed this thing wrong with the site, or I noticed that this was done and it was our bad. And just own up to it. And most guys, okay, cool. Can you go ahead and address it? And it might be something where it's like, oh, can you address it? Yeah, that's gonna take a couple hours. I mean, what are you gonna do? So those kind of accidents are going to happen, and it's not that big of a deal. Once again, the company, it's not just you. There are other people who are doing these things all the time. There's these same kind of accidents, these same kind of errors. The thing is you just may not know about them. But have lunch, discuss. You'll definitely find out. There's people who've done plenty worse than you have, and they are still A-okay. So.
Awesome. All right, Chris, I'm going to jump on here, and I have a question for you. You just spent 53 minutes dropping absolute jewels. And
I know, I ran out of time too. Sorry.
It was so awesome. I hope maybe you'll come back for another one of these because it was just so informational. And coming from a guy, I mean, you come across as just a normal dude who's, working the programming circuit and working your way through life programming, and it's awesome. And I really appreciate you coming on the show or the channel and doing this. My one question, because we have so many great questions here.
Go for it.
Yeah, well, as you can see, my background here is highly cluttered with like Star Wars paraphernalia and stuff like that. Let me go over here so people can see. So this is like one of my part-time jobs, right? Like I list stuff on the internet, collectibles and miscellaneous Stay Puft Marshmallow Men. You can see like a really horrifying person from a horror movie over there. But my question is, a lot of people are transitioning from jobs that have nothing to do with web development, right? Like there's no endpoint. What is your advice, or what can you say about that transition? Do you have any tips for making it easier, or how can we incorporate things we do outside of web development into our learning routine and into web development? Or is this just all just a waste of time? You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I can only speak for myself. So one thing that I could say is, so in regards to the Star Wars, Ghostbusters in the background, all that kind of stuff, there's a lot of developers who are really into that kind of stuff, right? Like, I love comics and superheroes and stuff, and that segues in directly with some of the other developers I met. First question I usually ask is like, so what's the dress code here? Because like, can I wear a graphic tee, or is it like a full button down, or like how do I got to do this? And it's usually like, oh, it's casual, or it depends on where you work, right? But as far as coming from a different background, so my background has nothing to do with web development. I did character animation before this, and the reason I got into it was because the industry that I had been in was starting to morph and change, and I was seeing things on the horizon, and I got into web development and saw the creativity and the artistry that it could be. But I've also seen people who are like, yeah, I used to do accounting, so now I'm doing web development. I mean, the real thing is like, if you're switching careers, which is totally fine, and it's actually pretty common right now. I know a few people who have switched careers. The thing is that you're switching into this career for a certain reason. And either A, you hate where you're coming from to begin with. So you hate accounting. It was boring. I hated it. So you like web development. It's fun. It's exciting. Or you're like, well, listen, for example, me, I loved my job. Like, I loved my field that I was in. But I was thinking about the future, thinking about my family, and thinking about just our situation and stuff. And I saw web development and I explored it, and I'm like, you know, I like this too. This is cool. And eventually, I like, more recently, I'm now getting at the point where I understand code. I know how to code. I can figure things out. I know how to figure out a new tool that I'm given, that I can take things from my past knowledge of animation, from my past knowledge of how overflow and overlap and transitions, all that stuff works, and start to pull and nestle it over into what I'm currently going to start developing, right? And it just kind of depends on what your background is. If it's more of an artistic field, even if you think it's not relevant, you will find a way to start incorporating that into your code, 100%.
So a Star Wars trinket can have relevance in web development.
Yes, it can go on your desk.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it just depends. And once again, I mean, no, I don't know about that specifically, but I guess the reason why I say that is, if you're into, like, you know, sci-fi and all that kind of stuff, you're probably creative, and you like tinkering with things, and ultimately web development is going to provide you that opportunity. You can build, you know, if you're learning a new skill, by all means, like, find a way to incorporate like little Star Wars like lasers into, you know, a game you're trying to design, or you're trying to learn. I don't know, like right now I'm messing with like 3JS, right? And that's like a 3D JavaScript thing. All right, well, build a Star Wars ship with it, right? You can still make those passions translate over into this field. And it just kind of depends on what those passions were. If you're really passionate about accounting, I assure you, there is definitely plenty of banks and credit unions, you name it, tons of companies who are like, you know accounting and you know programming, come work for us. Because those are algorithms, those are things that they want to mess with, right? If you used to sell, right? Like, for example, I used to sell Windows for a period. When I got into web development, and I was basically with like mobile development, actually, I was like, you know, when I was in sales, there was this thing that I wish that we had started making, like a basic app. I know I can make this app and I could sell it to companies. I could totally sell it to companies because there's a need in the market, and I know that market. I understand that market. And so whatever that background is, whether it's sales, accounting, you build light bulbs, I don't know, there's a way to incorporate code to make that transfer to a market. And those niches exist. You just gotta know sort of where to look for them. And if they don't, I mean, you can build your own.
That's a great answer. I am clanking my other keyboard here. I'm going to come on the camera for just one sec. Paradoodly-doo is asking, regarding asserting what you're worth in negotiations, how do you recommend projecting confidence and self-worth to those you're selling your value to? Ooh, this is a heavy question, Paradoodly-doo. How do you set yourself apart from others? Chris?
For sure. First of all, Paradoodly-doo, that's a great name.
It is.
I love saying that. Okay, so here's the thing. If you're going to throw out a number, right? 40,000, 60,000, 80,000, 100,000. Get used to saying that number over and over and over and over and over. Just say it over and over. Say it with confidence in the mirror and whatever the case is.
But Chris, that's a lot of money, says the little voice in my head.
What is a lot of money? To you, it might seem like a lot of money. To a company that makes multi-million dollars, you know, a week, what's 100K? That's a drop in the bucket if you make them $400,000 a year.
Yep.
You know, like it's once again, you are bringing value to the company. So if you are asking for a lot of money, it's totally justified provided you bring more value to the company. So if you ask for, you know, $100,000 a year, that's totally fine. But you better feel confident that the company, when they hire you, they're going to be getting more than $100,000 out of you. And if that translates to, you know, you need to tell them like, well, hey, you know, here's my experience. I know your websites cost between this range, and your average website does this. So, which means that your typical turnaround is within, you know, 2 months. So theoretically, my asking price, you should be able to pay off within 4 months. But I know that we're obviously working on more than just one project. So we have multiple projects going on. So in reality, my year's salary is honestly paid off in about in about a month. So I think I'm definitely worth that much money, you know. And some that comes into figuring out the specifics of the company. They really aren't going to grill you that hard on it, honestly. The reality is you need to be confident in it. If you believe it, and you should believe it. Don't try and lie to yourself. You're not gonna. You can't lie to yourself, right? If you don't. Once again, this is why I brought up looking at your area, right? So if in your area, you know, you're applying for an entry level, and in your area an entry level is, you know, $50,000, then you should be like, well, man, I'm not comfortable asking for that. No, you should be comfortable asking for that, because in your area, that is a reasonable expectation. Do you have the value of an entry level? I do. Okay, then. So why should you feel that you need to ask for less? And that's just what it comes down to.
Good point. Great point. And then how, you might have touched on this, but how do you set yourself apart from others? Paradoodly-doo is asking, because I know earlier in the talk you mentioned that you don't have to be a ninja. I mean, you don't have to be this superpower coder. Like, you can be normal. You don't have to be, you know, the top 0.001%. But at the same time, how do you set yourself apart from others?
Okay, so before doing web development, like I said, I did character animation, and for a while I was working for myself, and sometimes I hire people on board. Here's what I've noticed that has translated over in the hiring process, and it seems to be pretty consistent. Couple things. Here's the reality, right? When you send a cover letter, here's what's happening. Scanning. Oh, there's the keywords I was looking for, right? In web development, right? I was looking for somebody who knows, you know, a lamp stack. All right, yada 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 yada. Oh, lamp stack. Okay, cool. He's in the maybe pile. That's how it is. I don't care about like, oh, I'm a self-driven, really hard-working guy, and yet everybody is. Nobody cares.
Right.
We're looking for those strong keywords. Then, as far as sticking out, you can get creative with it. For me, one thing I try to do is try and build a brand association of some kind and consistency. So for me, when I decided that I was like going to be doing this web thing, initially when you looked me up online, I would show up very quickly for Chicago animation. All right, well that's a different thing now. So now I've kind of made it so that when I send them information, I'm like, oh, well, by the way, like I do YouTube videos. I talk about code. Here's my website that has a similar name. Here's a link to my portfolio, and just having these repetition things. I am interested in this blog. I'm interested in these videos. Just things that reiterate that you are involved in either the community or you where you're learning, how you're learning. You know, if you say there's an interesting thing I heard before. It's don't tell them, show them. So it's very much like, don't say you're a hard worker, right? Everybody is. Right. Show them you're a hard worker. So like on your resume, instead of saying like a hard worker, you could say like, you know, part of team that did this many hours, worked on personal project, built this thing. Those are what they're looking for. You know, active words like built this, dedicated this, deployed this, responsible for this. Those are active words that we look for, right? Then as far as setting yourself apart, for me, I did a video resume. And actually for this job I'm currently at, they sent me a test. This is actually a good example. So they sent me a test, just a common test. Like I said, it's a mock-up, make the website happen. And I was given the insight of don't use Bootstrap because a lot of other people do. So, okay, so I hard-coded in everything and did this thing. And anyways, I ended up getting the interview and they were discussing it with me. And they basically, what I did, because I was like, I was not feeling 100% hot on it. So what I decided to do is I sent them a video alongside it saying like, hey, you know, nice, thank you for the opportunity, yada, yada, yada. Here was my thinking process as I built this. Here's why I did what I did. And this is what I was going for. Here's the problems I faced. And they said during the interview, one of the reasons why I was there is because they didn't have anybody else do that. And they really enjoyed it. And for them, it solved a lot of the initial questions they were going to ask me during the interview, because they're like, well, we're going to ask you how you did this, but you kind of answered this already.
Sure.
So, and at least for me in my head, what I'm thinking is, okay, cool. Now they know I have a YouTube channel. They're probably looking at the other videos, which they did. But subliminally what's happening is they know my name. They know my name. They have like 100 candidates. They don't remember a ton of names, but they see the repetition over and over and over and over. And you just kind of like get in there and it just comes up in conversation. And so, yeah, if you can name drop anybody who's at the company, that helps. Whether you don't necessarily have to know them, but if through social engineering you find out that so-and-so has a blog at the company, follow the blog, learn about it. And then during conversation, you can always bring up like, oh yeah, yeah, Bob's blog on the for loop I thought was really interesting, and I like what he talks about with this and that. And it's that false association, but you can start to stick out because like, Bob, I know Bob. You know who Bob is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Huh. And you'll see almost always when you mention a name or they say, do you know anybody who works here? Or do you know of anybody? They usually write it down as soon as you say something. And whenever they write something down, it's like, huh, brownie point.
So searing your image on that person's brain through brownie points.
I mean, that's really what it is. It's
awesome.
It's little stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Great answers, great tips. Let's see what else we got. Chinatown Bus asks, do you have any thoughts on using free CodeCamp for a beginner? This is always a hot topic. Free CodeCamp is always guaranteed to get some people riled up. What are your thoughts on that, Chris?
So for me, all right, so when I was trying to teach myself how to code, I of course came across free CodeCamp because I was like, I need a boot camp. That seems like the great thing to do right now. And then I was like, I don't have any money for a boot camp. Free CodeCamp. Okay. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Mm-hmm. And there's actually another one, if you're interested, called the Odin Project. You can check that out, where they basically built a actual boot camp with projects, files, and stuff, but it was all Ruby based. Anyways, the point is, as far as free CodeCamp specifically, I personally didn't do very much with free CodeCamp. For me, what I did is I actually got started on Codecademy. My first thing was JavaScript on Codecademy, and I was like, all right, let's see if I even like this thing. And I started messing with it. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And started messing with it some more. And then from there, I started researching on YouTube because I'm like, once again, free, right? So Codecademy was free, YouTube was free, and then I started seeing all these links, and I started reading stuff. Then I'm like, all right, this might be a thing. And at the time, I was working at a job. I was working at a job at a health insurance call center place. But one of the perks was there was a lot of downtime in between calls. You could read a book. So I'm like, you know what? A lot of other developers taught themselves reading back in like the 80s. There's no reason that with the internet, like I can't do it with a book. So what ended up happening, and they didn't let me use the internet. That's another reason why. So what I did is I went to the library, my local library, and I got this big, thick book of JavaScript. And it was basically a manual. And I'm like, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to read this just page 1 to the end. And I did. And what I would do is I would read it, and then I didn't know what like a text editor existed. I didn't know any of that stuff. But I brought up like Notepad, and I brought up the inspector window, and I was just typing everything in the console, copying it on Notepad, emailing it to myself, and then at home I would copy and paste that into CodeChris, because then I could actually like see what syntax is incorrect, and all this stuff. Like this is what I was doing. But the point is that you know, you can just read and make that happen. So that was, yeah.
Yeah, I started off at Free Code Camp too. Like I feel like every self-taught developer one time or another comes across Free Code Camp, and it does have its usages. But for me as a beginner, it doesn't really teach you much. It tells you to find the answer and then come back and do the projects.
Yeah, I think the problem for me with Free Code Camp is like I would just feel stuck. Like I didn't know, and there really wasn't like hints. So right. I was just like, this is great, but I need some instruction of some kind. So that's where the books and the YouTube came in, and eventually, you know, like some Udemy stuff.
Okay, awesome. Chinatown Bus, I hope that answered your question. Let's go on. Michael Kornblum asks, Chris, have you ever run across a situation where your code quality had to be compromised due to deadlines?
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
Here's the thing. The internet is held together by popsicle sticks. I don't know if you know this.
I did not know this. Let me write this down.
The reality is the internet, or just websites in general, you have deadlines. You have serious deadlines. It is at the end of the day, you are working for a business, and in order to make profit, you have to meet deadlines. And sometimes there's a budget for a task or a project, and it can very much be that there's two ways of doing things. I've kind of mentioned this earlier, which is, you know, the fast way and just get it done, let's go. And then there's like, this is some good quality code. It's clean, it's simple, it's short. But sometimes it really is brute force. Absolutely, you definitely do compromise sometimes. You try not to, and it is a little bit of a balancing act, because the reality is if you are too sloppy and you are too inconsistent, or too consistent about always having, you know, bad code in there because you're trying to meet deadlines, the irony is your deadlines for future changes also get longer, because majority of your time isn't actually like, you know, on the keyboard typing. It's reading. It's like following things. Oh, okay, that's fine. And then you're changing things. You know, we see the movies like with like the hackers, and they're just like going nuts. But you know, once you start building this stuff, you realize like, oh no, it's not like that at all. It's a lot more like, you know, like that's much more of a realistic way of when you actually start coding. So yeah, you're going to compromise. Sometimes you try not to, and your peers will kind of give you that back and forth, where they sometimes say like, dude, who cares? Like we've got 10 minutes.
Right.
Just do this. Let's go. Nobody cares about this. It's a very unimportant feature or a very unimportant thing. It's not going to affect anything else. The
turn and burn, crank it out, let's get it pushed, let's get it live kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And that's why the internet is held together by popsicle sticks, because there is large portions of code that are just legacy in there, that what you think, this is the reality, you always think, I'll do that now, and later I'll come back to that and I'll make it better. I'll make it better later. Mm-hmm. Later never comes. It just doesn't.
And that's true for beginners too, doing projects. I know for me, just like on personal projects, like, yeah, this code sucks, but it works. I guess I'll come back and change it. Never do. I mean, you get distracted, life goes on, there's like other things, and you just never get back to it. So there's always that reality.
Well, and like when you're doing like these personal projects too, like, you know, the code isn't pretty. Like a lot of my personal code, like just, but the reality is like you're doing this stuff to learn. So it doesn't matter if it looks pretty, because what you've gained from it is like, hey, I know how to do this now. Next time when I'm actually applying it, I'll do it better. Mm-hmm. I don't need to fix it on this one. I don't need to prove it to anybody else for this one, but I've acquired, it's solved the mission of giving me this knowledge. So.
Right. Awesome answer. Again, let's go to Joral Jim. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. 83. I arrived after the live. What kind of JavaScript for a junior? Okay, let's see. What kind of JavaScript a junior front end dev normally must be great to deal with? So, for example, what are you doing for loops with your JavaScript at work? Like, tell us in concrete examples what you're working with.
Okay, so depends on the companies, right? So if you're going in, there's two things you're going to definitely want to know. You're definitely going to need to know jQuery, because regardless of anything, it makes just some processing faster. We just talked about deadlines. So you got to get stuff done. jQuery is a way to get stuff done and to make changes later faster. So you're definitely going to need to know jQuery. And you're also going to just need to really know how JavaScript works. And when I say that, let's back it up. ES5, okay? There's a lot of syntax changes in ES6. The reality, though, is that majority of your day is going to be working with legacy code that's written by others, or code that's already been done. And all that code is not at ES6 standards yet. So you're definitely going to want to understand just the basics. If you know your for loops, and you can run through an array, it doesn't require anything super heavy. And once again, if you don't know how to do something, you'll be able to look online. There is this idea that you need to know all these crazy like JavaScript, crazy algorithm patterns and all that. Depends on where you work. The reality is I've never really had to use anything super drastically complex that's in, like, I don't know, like the fizz buzz situations. Really haven't needed to use something like that specifically, but I definitely have had to go through loops. I definitely had to have certain things triggered based on like click events. So it just kind of depends. If you're junior coming in, feel comfortable with JavaScript. You don't need to know it perfect 100%, but you should be able to understand the basic syntax and know your jQuery. Be familiar with like the very basics of Node.js, because the reality is that you may not use Node.js heavily, but you probably will have some basic things that'll be required, whether it's even like a Sass compiler, or they're using Gulp for something like a browse sync, whatever the case is. So just the very basics, and you're not really going to be challenged too much on it. Really, they're going to be the questions, like I said, you're going to have are going to be about what's your basic conditionals and setting up some basic jQuery.
Right. I think a lot of times too, like for beginners, we want to know it all. Like we talked about, like, oh my God, I have to know all these algorithms, but that's not really the case at all.
No, it's not. And once again, even if you do need an algorithm, the reality is you're going to find it like on Stack Overflow at some point.
Right. Stack Overflow is your friend. Let's go to the next question here. Let's see. Hey, Chiquito, how's it going? Thanks for joining us. Ed Rosario, he's asking a great question here. Great job, Chris. Thanks for the info. In your department or team, have you noticed diversity as far as age is concerned?
Good question.
Mm-hmm.
So the first company I worked at, smaller company, there was a 2-year difference between, so I'm almost 30. Am I? Yeah. There's about a 2-year difference between me and the other guy. And then there was about a 14-year difference between me and another developer. And there was we were all within 20 years. I would say most of the team was about within that age range. The new company I work at, it's a larger company. I would say the scale is very diverse as far as ages go, backgrounds go. People coming from all over, different backgrounds, different ages. It just comes with the company too, right? It's a bigger company, and you got people coming from all over, and so you'll definitely find a diversity. So if you are worried that I'm too young or I'm too old, they're not going to care. It really doesn't come down to that. Once again, it just really comes down to your skill set. So. And
there's a lot of horror stories coming out specifically of Silicon Valley. Like, if you're over 25, forget it, like your career is over. But that may be true in some places. But I read recently, like 90% of all development jobs are outside Silicon Valley. And the truth is there aren't enough talented developers as it is. So age discrimination, an issue, definitely an issue, especially in the tech field. But you're an example, Chris. You said in your company, it's larger. There's all kinds of ages represented. Whereas with like a smaller VC or, you know, startup somewhere in Silicon Valley, maybe not the case. Like more beanbag culture, beanbag and foosball type thing.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So I visited, my friend works downtown, and that culture is very, for the most part, very young, right? It's got that like hipster vibe, right? And that's that company. But I also know somebody else who works for Oracle, and it definitely isn't like necessarily like only young people there. Like there's definitely people who have been with the company for quite a number of years, and they're definitely taking people who, you know, aren't young, because they need people who, you know, once again, have the skill set. And I don't know, I think depending on where you work, there's different attributes that are given to you. I think when you're older, there can be the association that you're wiser. But when you're younger, there's also the perception that like, oh, we can pay them less. They're more naive. So there's this kind of, it depends on where you go, honestly. But like I said, especially in the burbs, if you are outside of the city, the reality is in the burbs, there's much more struggling to find people because, you know, where are they coming? They're all going to the city. Right. So in the burbs, you'll have a lot more pull weight, regardless of what you are, just because the reality is I need a developer. I don't care how you got here.
Right. Well, Ed says he's 52 years old and he's a newbie. Start coding? Definitely, Ed. Keep on coding. There's a place for Ed for sure. I mean, yeah, like we've been talking, there's so many openings, so many jobs. And if you can do it, a lot of companies don't have the option of caring of how old you are. You know what I mean?
100%. And like I said, once again, if you can, so if you are like worried about your age or anything, you know, there's this saying, right? On the internet, nobody knows if you're a dog. So, right? So nobody has to know your age online. And when you're going through these filter systems, you don't have to broadcast your age, right? If you're trying to give the perception, once again, it's to get to that face-to-face interview. If you're trying to get the perception that maybe you're newer to code, but you don't have like 40 years of experience of something else, you know, cut back, just bring out like the last couple of years of, you know, work that you think is relevant, you know, keep to like the last, you know, 10 years and just pull what's relevant and then say, I'm learning code now, yada, yada, yada. And when you get to that face-to-face interview, you can basically, like I said, at that point, you're contending. And they're not really going to discriminate you just because of your age. They're gonna be like, well, you know what? Like this guy, he meets our standards. So.
Right. Awesome. All right, Ed, thanks for the question and thanks for joining us. Anybody else have any questions for Chris tonight? If not, we'll give you guys another couple minutes or so. But I think we're gonna wrap it up here. Chris, is there anything you'd like to add or missed or want to throw out?
I think I covered a lot of stuff.
Yeah, you did. You totally did. You totally did. With that, I think we're going to wrap it up. Guys, if you do have questions that you weren't able to think of or just joining us, hopefully Chris will be nice enough to come back and join us on the channel. It was great having you, Chris. And I really appreciate you taking time out to share all this knowledge, just invaluable information tonight. And it looks like from the chat room, there are a lot of people who are really digging what you had to say. So thanks for coming on. Woo, 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 woo.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. It's been awesome. I've really enjoyed this, and it's been good.
Awesome. One more question: if people want to follow you, are you a social media guy or what's your thing?
So predominantly, most of the stuff I'm doing is on YouTube. So you can follow me. My YouTube channel is CodeChris, CodeChris, and you guys can follow me on YouTube. I try to post videos all the time, from motivational stuff to just similar questions to what I've kind of talked about today. And I do have all the other social media stuff, which I don't post to enough. But if you want to follow, it's usually CodeChris M. And the reason for that is because CodeChris turns out to be very common after I chose my domain.
Cool. And I'll put that in the video box after we wrap this up here.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
All right, Chris and YouTube, thanks for joining us. And we'll see you somewhere online, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, and I'd love to come back. It's been awesome.
Awesome. Right on. All right, we'll see you guys later.
Bye, guys.